Hi, this is the second video. In the second video, we'll talk about the bureaucracy in South Korea, and then we may talk about the politicians as well. But then, in the previous video, we talked about the Japanese bureaucracy, but what happened to South Korea's bureaucracy? First of all, how to be a bureaucrat in Korea. There's a historical background. Korea was Confucian society. And in Confucian society, governments, bureaucrats are usually scholars, right? I'm sorry. Scholars were bureaucrats, right? So in Confucian society, being a bureaucrat, that means being scholars. It's an honor of the family, honor of the villages, honor of the your hometown. And civil service system actually existed from Shilla dynasty in South Korea, which was 1,200 years ago. It was influenced by the Chinese Tang dynasty. Quite long history, right? So if you want to be a bureaucrat, you should take the exam. Merit-based system. But modern bureaucratic system was heavily influenced from Japanese colonial period and during the U.S. occupation period. Right? Because of this kind of tradition, bureaucrats were loyal servants to the government regime. I'm sorry, government regime. Since 1960s, finally Korea's bureaucratic system started to be modernized and modern style of the bureaucratic system. What was their socio-economic backgrounds? Mostly Korean bureaucrats from the university graduate, and more than 70% of the bureaucrats came from SKY University, Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University in Seoul. I'm sorry, Yonsei. Three universities: Seoul National, Korea, Yonsei. Right? They are kind of elite groups in South Korea, and they were quite dominant inside the government organization. But compared to Japan, their socioeconomic backgrounds are quite varied, unlike the Japanese case, and relatively equal. As soon as you are competent and good at exams, you could be a bureaucrat, right? So if you successfully pass this competitive exam, your life could have been changed. So once you pass the exam, you may work in the government buildings in Seoul, Gwacheon, and this is Sejong City. These are main government building organizations, offices. So this is the newest one, right, in Sejong City. The government office building is constructed like a snake. I don't know why they follow the shape of a snake, but they built like this. And since being a bureaucrat were family honor, right? Usually, for high level of the civil servant exam, you may prepare the exam even after you graduate universities. So there's a Goshichon in South Korea. So you stay this kind of office, this kind of home, one room apartment, one room buildings, and you stay there, eat there, but at the same time you study like this, right? And you may find that these kind of people wearing training suits around this Goshichon villages in South Korea, in front of Seoul National University. So there are some high civil servant exam, tuition centers, bookstores, this kind of study room, there are many convenience facilities for the people who preparing for the civil servant exam in Korea. So there's a kind of a madness. So if you want to take a tuition from the tuition center, you may pay some money and get a lecture from the distinguished lecturers who successfully passed the exam usually. And there is some designated restaurant area. So if you pay a certain amount of money, like $200 for example per month, you can freely have 3 meals in this kind of restaurants and in these villages. So let's begin with some historical facts. In Korea, until 1997, Korea was not democratized. Lee Seung-man was the first president in South Korea, and then he was independence movement activist, but he became the authoritarian president. After the demise of the Lee Seung-man, Chang Myon become the prime minister. They adopted cabinet system and parliamentary system, and Chang Myon become the prime minister. But as soon as he inaugurated, there was a coup d'etat by Park Chung-hee. He's the Park Chung-hee. He's a former military general and commit the coup d'etat and gained the political power until 1979. In 1979, October 26, he was assassinated by his former KCIA, Korean Central Intelligence Officer, and he died. After his death, Che Gyuhwa, prime minister back then, became the president for a while, tentative president, incumbent president from 1979 to 1980. But new military leader Chun Doo-hwan also committed coup d'etat in 1981 and became the president. So until 1987, it was a military regime or authoritarian regime in South Korea. Under these kind of circumstances, Korea's bureaucratic system, earlier phase, you could see a lot of less educated people and less competitive people. But since 1960s, there was an education fever. My parents and parents' generation actually sacrificed their lives and earned money for their children's education. And there was a kind of a social, images of bureaucrat. If you become a government bureaucrat, your life will be changed, and your family life will be changed as well. Now, over 80% of the Korean population is college graduate, and being a college student doesn't distinguish your social status anymore. So, being a bureaucrat become very popular. Very popular among the Korean students. Our department, public administration graduate, more than half of students are preparing for civil service exam right now. Civil service exam, relatively fair, right? As soon as you are good at exams and you're interested in government affairs, you can study hard and you can pass the exam. This is an open competition exam, and there's a career path civil servant and special path civil servant. Career path civil servant means you actually pass the competitive civil service exam. There are some people who become the bureaucrats because you follow the new president. President actually appoint some key secretaries or bureaucrats, and if the term of the president finished, you also retire, right? The specific path. So when we talk about the bureaucrats in Korea, we usually refer to career path bureaucrats. Career path means there are 3 types of examinations based on their rank. I can show you this kind of a pyramid. So there are civil service exam. There are 3 types. Usually grade 9. There is a grade 1 to grade 9. Grade 1 is the highest, but we don't have grade 1 anymore. From grade 2 to grade 1, we just call them high-ranked officers. Okay. So usually there are three types of exam. Grade 9, the lowest. If you graduate the high school, you can do this kind of job, right? Exam is easy but competitive. Grade 7, you may be a principal clerk once you pass this kind of grade 7 exam. Grade 5, is the faster track or senior civil service system, and this is one of the most difficult exam in Korea. You become the junior manager level, 사무관, and this exam is a gateway for realizing so-called government dream to talented young people. So once you pass this grade 5 exam, you will be the junior level manager and participate in important policy making. And if you're lucky, if you are lucky, you may have a chance to be a vice minister as a career path bureaucrat. But if you're more luckier, you can be a minister, or you can enter the political world once you retire. So to be a fast track civil servant, you have to study this thick, exam items. Usually constitutional law. Their first time exam, multiple choice exam, and once you pass this exam, you may have essay exam, and once you successfully pass this exam, you may get interviewed. Right? For first, there are many tracks, but for general track, you may have to take a constitutional law and English, Korean history, public law, and public administration. These are 5 key exam area. If you successfully pass this exam, multiple choice, you may choose your favorite exam subject, like a public administration, diplomatic laws, and so forth, and political science, and so forth. Once you pass this exam, you may take the interview exam too. Once you pass this second level essay questions, you are almost done. You almost passed. But during the authoritarian regime, government wanted to filter out the inappropriate people. For example, South Korea is divided into 2 countries, right? North Korea, South Korea, and there were some people who were involved in the communist ideology. Through the interviews, you can filter those people. Right? Apprenticeship. Once you pass the fast track civil servant exam, you will be rotated every 1 or 2 years. And Korea is also based on the seniority system. Used to depend on the seniority system. How many years you served in the government is decide your salary level. And also, once you successfully pass the fast track exam, you may have a chance to study abroad, usually America's top universities. But and also usually bureaucrats has a good social and economic educational background. I mentioned that many actually students from SKY universities, right? Usually go to powerful institution if you have a good educational background and good social backgrounds. What will be your promotion chance? Usually once you pass the exam, you will be a junior manager, and then after 6 to 7 years, you will be the division directors, and unlike the Japanese case, Korea, assistant vice ministers, and then you may have a chance to be a politician, retire early, or continue to promote, like a vice minister and minister job. In Korea, vice minister is a political position, so assistant vice minister is the final job as a career path civil servant. Okay? So salary level is usually lower than private company, but these days it's getting better and better. but normally during the most of development period, we believe that civil servant salary was about 80% of the private company's salary. But instead, your status is legally protected. You are not fired even if you commit some serious mistake, and compensation plan is quite good. You may have a priority to get into the public housing as well. Right? You may have this kind of a benefit if you become the top bureaucrats. Retirement. Usually the Korean bureaucrat retire at 57 on the if you are under the grade 6, but it can be 60 if you are work for the upper level bureaucrats. And once you retire, you may, similar to Japanese case, you retire, you may find a second career. You can be a political appointee. You may run for national assemblyman, enter the gain a membership in political parties, and you may have a chance to exercise your expertise. Also, there are many thousands of the public enterprises in South Korea too, in various areas: energy sector, housing sector, development sector, construction sector, transportation, banks, travel, tobacco, and so forth. There are thousands of jobs available to retired people from the central ministries. Also, you can enter the related private companies. For example, if you are ex-bureaucrats at the Ministry of Transportation, right? You may work for the regulatory department, aviation regulation, right? Then once you decide to retire, maybe Korean Airs may be interested in hiring you as their employees, right? So this kind of a second job acquisition was quite popular among the central bureaucrats. For example, I think this guy Kogon, Mr. Kogon, was one of the most luckiest guy in South Korea as a career path bureaucrat. Let's take a look at his biography. He was the Seoul National University graduate, political science department, and he passed the National Advanced Civil Service exam in 1961, grade 5 exam. And in 1973, so let's say this was his 25, for example, only in less than 20 years, he became the deputy governor of Gangwon province. In 1975, he was appointed as the governor of the South Jeolla University province. It was his 40s. In 1979, he was the presidential secretary of political affairs to the President Park Chung-hee. Under the Chun Doo-hwan regime, another military regime, he was appointed as the Minister of Transportation. In 1985, he became the National Assemblyman. 1997, he became the Ministry of Home Affairs. Under the democratic regime, Roh Tae-woo, he was appointed as the first mayor he was appointed the mayor to Seoul. In 1997, he became the prime minister, first elected mayor of Seoul, and became the prime minister in 2003. And he served as an acting president when the President Roh Moo-hyun was impeached by the National Assembly. So look at his career. His CV is kind of phenomenal. No one experienced this kind of various government position, ministerial position. And once he served as the president of the Myeongji University in Seoul, right? So he experienced the governor, civil servants, national assemblyman, ministers, prime ministers, president of the university, private university, acting president. He experienced and elected governor, elected mayor of Seoul. One of the spectacular career as a bureaucrat. But Ban Ki-moon, this guy, former U.S. UN Secretary General, right? He also has a kind of a spectacular career path as a bureaucrat in South Korea. He served as a foreign diplomat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's also the Seoul National University graduate, Department of International Relations, and he passed Advanced Civil Servant exam for Diplomatic Affairs Grade 5 in 1970. So 10 years gap between the Kogon and Pan Ki-moon, right? Since 1970 March, he served as a diplomat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in the meantime, he had the chance to study abroad at the Harvard Kennedy School in 1985, and he became the head of foreign policy, head of the foreign policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1995, and he became the vice minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2000s, foreign policy advisor at the presidential office in 2003, and become the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And then during his position as a minister, President Roh Moo-hyun actually recommended him to run for UN Secretary General in 2006, and he actually was elected. So in bureaucratic world, there's a saying, do just half of what Pan Ki-moon did as a bureaucrat. So he's also kind of a legendary figure in bureaucratic world in South Korea. So this actually summarizes, basic sketch about the bureaucrats' life and bureaucrats' characteristics and backgrounds and their role in South Korean context. Now let's move to political world. We will look at the politicians in Japan first. As I mentioned earlier, bureaucrats and politicians are kind of rivals in public policy making. So usually in democratic countries, politicians' role is greater than bureaucrats. But unlike the Western perspectives, bureaucrats play a crucial role in East Asia. But now let's take a look at the Japan's politicians first. How to be politicians in Japan? LDP is a liberal democratic party in Japan. This political party dominated Japanese politics for decades, and still it's a ruling party. There is a historical background. After World War II, Japan was surrendered to the United Allied Forces, right? So there's a organization called the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, SCAP. This Allied forces actually entered Japan, and Japanese emperor surrendered to the Allied powers during the World War II. And this SCAP actually allowed the politicians to re-enter the political world, but they failed to be re-elected. That means all the politicians under the Japanese military government, these old politicians actually failed to be re-elected. More than 70% of them failed. So this period, actually, there was a rise of new politicians group, new generational politicians in Japan. Who are these new Japanese politicians? Actually, LDP was established in 1955, right? So around this area, this period, there was a rise of new generational politics. Usually, they are not from elite backgrounds. Many of them actually came from countryside, variety of regions, areas, and districts. And also, their family background is also varieties. So they are, unlike the Japanese bureaucrats, the politicians' backgrounds relatively diverse. If you look at their educational background is also quite diverse. Only 20% of politicians from the elite groups, from the top prestigious universities like Kyoto and Tokyo universities. 33% from the private universities. In Japan, public universities is stronger and more prestigious usually. But many of them politicians actually come from private universities, and also 30% of the politicians came from two-year colleges. So compared to bureaucrats in Japan, politicians' background is quite surprising. And majority of Japanese politicians did not have elite background in this regard. And more contemporary period, politicians are also become elite groups too. But earlier period of Japanese politics, they do not have elite background. Then how to become elite politicians? If you could get the party endorsement and join the membership in the faction, LDP faction. Inside the Liberal Democratic Party, there was some small groups of the factions, both politics. There are leaders of the factions, right? If you get the support and the endorsement from the factions, you may get elected in the local elections. And there are many of them are second generation of politicians. They inherited their political position in politics. For example, if your father is a Nakamura-san, your family name is same. So if you run for national elections, you may have benefit. People recognize your name as your father's name, so you will gain some same votes from the voters. You know what I'm saying? And if you have a strong local support group, which is a Koenkai, this is local support organizations in your electoral district. So these people actually help you to be re-elected. They actively participate in local festivals, or they support a local resident, marriage, funerals, and so forth, so that you can get the votes from these kind of people. So if you get elected, you will be LDP politicians too. Once you are elected, you may maintain this local support group. So let's assume that I'm a newbie to this political world, and I got the support from the one particular faction, and luckily I successfully elected in Busan Sogu Electrics, right? Once you are elected, you may maintain the Koenkai group who strongly supported during the election period, and these people also help you to be re-elected. How? Provides gifts. These groups actually participate varieties of the activities in local villages, and they help you personally. They help you to attend the marriages, ceremonies, local ceremonies, and like local school events, funerals, right? In the name of yourself, right? So that voters remember your name for next election. Also, this group, local support group, Koenkai, help you to maintain good relationship with the LDP factions, your boss, and organizations, right? So once you have accumulate this kind of practice and successfully maintain a local Koenkai, it may be very easier to get re-elected. And how do you promote it in LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, inside the political parties? It's basically based on your seniority. How many times you were elected? First time, then your rank inside the National Assembly is low. 10 times elected, you have very special person in the political party. So based on number of terms you're elected, your promotion party leadership will be decided. Typical position of the first election is the committee member in Parks, Policy Affairs Research Council inside the Liberal Democratic Party. So LDP, to fight against the bureaucracy, they established this Policy Affairs Research Council, like a Policy Affairs Research Council in diplomacy. Then you join this group and learn about diplomacy and work together with your assemblyman and discussions, meet the stakeholders, and make a draft a bill for National Assembly, right? First 3 terms are considered as a training period, right? First time elected, second time elected, and third time elected. These people are considered as a training period, okay? Once you become the Diet members, National Assemblyman 4 times, you may be considered as a senior inside the political party. So, candidate, you should not lose in election, right? Continuously get elected is the key. And you have to show your loyalty to the faction leaders, faction boss, right? There are 4 to 16 identifiable factions inside the Liberal Democratic parties, okay? And each faction, some of them are very, very powerful, with largest number of elected politicians, and they may produce a prime minister. Japan has a parliamentary system, so faction is very important in deciding electing prime ministers. You should show the vote potential. You are young, attractive, and show some capabilities. Then you will be regarded as a strong candidate for promotion. You must show some fundraising talent. If you have a lot of connection with the businesses and big fundraisers, you may have regarded as a respected person in the party. And important faction, which faction you belong to. If you belong to the specific powerful factions, you will be regarded as powerful politicians. Usually there are 4 to 16 identifiable factions, but maximum there were 60 factions inside the political party. Party presidency, party leaders were decided by your leadership. If you are leader of the specific powerful faction, then you may have a chance to be a party leadership, and at the same time you will be considered as a next prime minister. So this guy is one of the example that successfully enjoyed his career as a politician, Tanaka Gakue. Tanaka Gakue was the prime minister of Japan from 1972 to 1974. It's a relatively short term, but his career was very successful. As you can see, he's the politician from Niigata Prefecture. He's not from the elite family, rural family, right? Unlike the bureaucrats. He was one of the most famous politicians in modern Japanese history. Never completed high school, not elite at all, right? Never completed high school, not college. But he became the LDP member in 1955 when LDP was established. And at his age 44, he became the Minister of Finance and Minister of MITI. He was also gained public support when he has a kind of a connection with the United States, and he became the prime minister at 52. So based on his career, he could exercise a greater control over bureaucrats in finance ministry, industrial sector, finance sector, and communication sector and construction sector. So he was although bureaucrats has been recognized as the most powerful political figure, as a politician, Tanaka Gakue exercised a greater power over bureaucrats in specific fields: finance, industry, telecommunication, and construction. Then what about politicians in South Korea? Being a politician in South Korea actually divided into 3 parts. If you look at history, because right after the independence from Japanese colonial rule, there was a few people who could work for political world. So former Japanese supporters during the colonial period become the politicians or bureaucrats. That's the one group. Second group, the former military leaders who committed to coup d'etat in 1961 also entered the political world too. Of course, many of them become the government agency head or minister as well, but many of them also become the politicians too. Others, who become the politicians, former businessmen, former lawyers, professors could become the politicians in South Korea. So we can divide into three groups, distinguished groups, in terms of the political background, historical background of the politicians in South Korea. If you look at the politicians' usual socioeconomic backgrounds, they are not necessarily elite background, or affluent family. For example, former president, Nobel Peace Prize winner Kim Dae-jung was actually came from the farmer family. Kim Yong-sam actually came from the fishery family in Busan area. Of course, this Kim Yong-sam's father was a very rich man, rich fisherman. Variety of regions, hometowns, areas, and districts. And there's unlike the Japanese case, there was a strong regionalism between the southwest and southeast. Busan belong to this area, southeast area. Okay, and so in Korea, interestingly, where you were born, birthplace was quite important because it's related to equity issues. Let me take an example here. So this is South Korea, this is Seoul, right? And this is Busan. During the 1960s, Park Chung-hee regime built a Gyeongbu Expressway. Gyeong means Seoul, Gyeongbu, Busan. Gyeongbu Expressway was built. So there is a big mountain area here. We can divide the southern region into two groups. First one is southwest Honam region. Honam. This part is Yeongnam region, southeast. So Busan is in Yeongnam region. Okay. So this was an axis of the economic development belt, but there was a strong regionalism between the two groups, Honam and Yeongnam. Honam versus Yeongnam. Honam is Jeolla province. Is traditionally there was opposition party supporters. They strongly against the military regime, and they supported the democratization, but they alienated from the development period until 1990s. So if you look at the major industrial facilities, Pohang city has a POSCO. Ulsan has Hyundai, right? Many of Samsung, SK chemicals were located in this Yeongnam area. Instead, this area, Honam, was a food production, rice production area. So it was also very important to Korean food security, right? Instead, they didn't have proper industrial facilities. So they were isolated from the development period. And also there was a Gwangju Democratic Movement. About 2,000 people died by the military regime. And it was a home of the former president Kim Dae-jung. He used to get more than 90% of vote from this resident. And home of the Democratic Party. And very radical support and leftist and progressive regions in Korea. Unlike this Honam region, Yeongnam region, southeast region is traditionally ruling party basis. They produced the three president, five president. Okay, Park Chung-hee came from here. Roh Tae-woo came from here. Jeon Do-han, president, came from here. Kim Yong-sam from Goje, southern part of Korean Peninsula, and Roh Moo-hyun from Busan. So five former presidents actually came from this Yeongnam area, Southeast Asia, Southeast area of South Korea. And this, traditionally, there were many Confucian scholars lived here and very conservative compared to the Southwest. This regional divides were very strong and very critical in understanding Korean politics. But anyway, if you look at the some educational background of the Korean politicians, in general, about 35-40% assemblymen came from the SNU, Seoul National University. And 50% of the SNU graduate from Faculty of Law as a lawyer right, group was strong in South Korean politics. Former judges and lawyers, quite strong presence in the political world. And in the period of industrialization, for example, military regime academy graduate, army academy graduate will also show the strong presence in political world. And in Korea, how to become a National Assemblyman? Of course, you should get the party endorsement. There are two major parties, ruling military regime parties and major opposition parties, Democratic Party, right? But basically, your former career, like soldiers and government bureaucrats and the public enterprise employees, lawyer, these kind of backgrounds were very important. Education and the regional ties, where you were born, Yeongnam, Southwest, sorry, Southeast. These kind of hometown ties were quite strong in South Korea. And to become a National Assemblyman in 1960s and 70s, a regional tie, your hometown connection was very important, and educational tie, because in Korea, alumni associations, Donghwa Alumni Associations, or Busan National University Alumni Associations, getting support from this kind of alumni associations were very important. We call it 동문회, right? Alumni associations. And also there were kind of a civic groups called the Hangwoo. Hang means your hometown. Hangwoo means your friends. And Hui is organization. So this is a hometown associations. Once you successfully get the hometown association support, your next election will be very, very easier. And there's a Huwonhui, personal supporter groups. So if you successfully organize a personal support group like a Japanese politicians, you may have a kind of great help from these kind of organizations. Once you elected, you have to manage the electoral district for elections, and also, of course, maintaining good relationship with the party political leaders is important. Of course, your personal connection with the president will be beneficial greatly. How to promote inside the political parties? Actually, under the Park Chung-hee and the authoritarian regime, these ruling parties were under the control of the strong presidents. We call them imperial president. Very, very strong presidents. So your promotion was based on your seniority, and party structure was very hierarchical. But connection to the president was also very important. And if you are the kind of a famous TV personnel or a former movie action star, you may have a chance to get reelected. So this popularity is also important, factor. Faction is less important in Korean context. Many of political party leaders were appointed as the ministers or advisors to the president. Political parties were less independent from the presidential influence. But for opposition party leaders, faction was important. For example, look at this. Factions in opposition party in Korea. DJ계 Kim Dae-jung, former president, right? He came from Honam, southwest region. And his party, his faction get a lot of support from the southwest area, and very progressive. And Kim Dae-jung became the president from 1998 to 2003. Kim Young-sam, YS, actually came from Southeast Asian region, and he's become conservative and become the president from 1993 to 1997. But during the authoritarian regime, these two former presidents were opposition party leaders together, and there was an inter-party rivalry. But at the same time, they united for democratization from 1960 to 1968. These two were a very famous democratic movement activists, and also they were opposition party leaders. So it's a kind of an irony of history. There was an outlier in this regard, former President Roh Moo-hyun, who served as a president from 2003 to 2008. He was the politician from Busan, Kim Hae, rural family. Never completed university education, but he studied by himself and passed the judicial exam and became the judge and lawyer. So he served as a judge for 6 months, not years, but he thought that judge is not his position, so he became the lawyer later. And while he served as a lawyer, he earned a lot of money. He became a rich man. But one day he was selected by the Kim Young-sam, former president Kim Young-sam, and he joined his party and get reelected in 1988 after democratization. And he was also hired by the Kim Dae-jung and served as a minister, minister for maritime administration under the Kim Dae-jung administration too. So he was also welcomed by these two cross-town rival in Korea. He created a very good public image as a regionalism breaker, because when his party was not popular in Busan area, he ran for National Assemblyman in Busan. So his image was like this: oh, he's a regionalism breaker. He doesn't care about the re-election, but he really wants to unite the Korean people into one, right? And he didn't actually commit any crime scandals. His image was very clean, and he was a lawyer for human rights activism, and opposition party member, served as an opposition party member, and he was a kind of brave politician. So he had the loyal supporters in particular from younger generations, while he didn't get enough support from his party, Democratic Party. But anyway, he was very popular politician and eventually became the president in 2003 to 2008. So this is a typical image of Korean politicians. These days, a number of National Assemblymen well prepared in annual audit of national affairs and points out the bureaucrats' mishaps and the problems, trying to check the bureaucrats. So it's not unusual seeing apologizing ministers and the bureaucrats to National Assemblymen in South Korea. But at the same time, there is a lame image during the National Assemblyman meetings. Many people fell asleep, and this was covered by the mass media. So mass media also highlighted some problems of the incompetent politicians inside the government, inside the National Assembly. And frequently, opposition party, ruling party fight with each other, and it created this kind of scenes. So once Korea's very famous politician become the National Assemblyman, and when he retired from political world, he said like this: politics in Korea is a kind of a comedy. Nothing serious has happened. Right? So if we conclude, we can think about the bureaucrat politicians relations in both countries, or in even broader East Asian context. Against the bureaucratic dominance model, we can see some evidence against the bureaucratic dominance model. In Japan, LDP politicians made the public policy in later part after 1980s. Maybe true during the LDP dominance from 1955 to 1993. and politicians modify and adopt the bureaucratic decisions. So bureaucrats draft a bill and send it to the National Assembly, right? But it is actually final actions of the politicians who modify and adopt the government bureaucrats' decision. And in particular, Japan's LDP politicians created a kind of a study group called PARC, Policy Affairs Research Council. Top political leadership has a substantial leverage over bureaucrats through these organizations. And bureaucratic information monopoly was increasingly checked by LDP politicians. And Liberal Democratic Party members actually formed a study group through this PARC organization to fight against the bureaucrats. Then, based on this kind of observation, who governs? Bureaucrats or politicians? So the advocates of the relatively equal relationship between the politicians and bureaucrats actually argue that they refuse the bureaucratic dominant model. As long as a strong state and strong society model exists, we can think about some different option. Strong state model actually was particularly true for 1950s and 60s politics in Japan, but now it's not that clear. In Korean case, in the period of authoritarian regime, military regime, political world was dominated by the strong presidency, imperial presidency, right? Political parties were not free from the presidential influence, and there was no clear division of labor between the bureaucrats and politicians during the military regime. So in Korean context, it's not that simple, but Japanese context, earlier period, bureaucrats were dominant, but later on, politicians also gained the power to check the bureaucrats. So this is the summary of the this week's lecture. I hope that you understand, the nature of the bureaucrats and politicians in both countries, or broadly speaking, in East Asia. And I hope that we can all meet in the class meeting at the, in next week. And next week's topic will be big businesses. So I hope that you enjoy the happy traditional holiday, the Korean version of Thanksgiving. Happy Chuseok. See you next week. Thank you very much. And please leave your name under the video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.